All right, good afternoon. Welcome back. Our guest today, who is joining us online, is Anjali Atrakar, the Assistant Secretary General of UNAIDS. She'll be joining us virtually to discuss the launch of the 2025 Global AIDS Update entitled AIDS Crisis and the Power to Transform. For those of you who don't have it, there's a report and QR codes in the back if you want to take a look at it. Tomorrow will be Friday, but it will be a busy day. At 11 o'clock, there'll be a briefing by Arafat Jamal, the UNHCR representative in Afghanistan. He will join us virtually to discuss the humanitarian situation in Afghanistan. Then at noon, my guest will be Carl Scow, who is, you know well, the Deputy Executive Director of the World Food Program. He will be here in person to brief you on his recent visit to Gaza. Also on Monday, I want to flag that Monday is July 14th. In addition to being Bastille Day, it is also the day that the Secretary General will be here to launch in person the Sustainable Development Goal Report 2025. He will be joined by the Deputy Secretary General Amina Mohammed and our Undersecretary General for Economic and Social Affairs, Junhua. That will be at 12:45, just after the briefing. I do expect the Secretary General to take one or two questions before leaving the Deputy Secretary General and Mr. Lee to answer questions on the report. A number of you, in fact, a large number of you, have asked me questions about our reactions to the sanctions imposed by the United States on Francesca Albanese, and I can say to you that the imposition of sanctions on special rapporteurs is a dangerous precedent. Francesca Albanese, like all other special UN human rights rapporteurs, is an independent human rights expert appointed by the UN Human Rights Council and reporting to the UN Human Rights Council. Special rapporteurs do not report to the Secretary General. He has no authority over them or their work. That being said, member states are perfectly entitled to their views and to disagree with reports by special rapporteurs, but we encourage them to engage with the UN's human rights architecture. The use of unilateral sanctions against special rapporteurs or any other UN expert or official is unacceptable. Turning to the situation in Gaza, and you've been asking us about the dire fuel shortage in the Gaza Strip, and I had promised you an update, and I can share one with you that was given to us by our good colleagues in the Office of the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, and they tell us that yesterday a UN team managed to bring in about 75,000 liters of fuel from Israel into the Gaza Strip. This is the first such provision in 130 days. As we mentioned yesterday, we and our humanitarian partners need hundreds of thousands of liters of fuel each day to keep essential life-saving and life-sustaining operations going, meaning that the amount entered yesterday isn't sufficient to cover even one day of energy requirement. Fuel is still running out, and services will shut down if greater volumes do not enter the Gaza Strip immediately. One partner, for instance, reported to us this week that in a matter of days, fuel shortages could cut off supplies to clean drinking water to about 44,000 children that depend on that water source. This just would further increase the risk of the lack of fresh water will only further increase the risk of waterborne illnesses such as cholera, diarrhea, and dysentery. Meanwhile, the Israeli military continues its operations across the Gaza Strip, including shelling and ground incursions. This morning, people waiting to get nutritional supplements were reportedly struck in Deir el-Balah. According to Al-Aqsa Hospital, the attack resulted in dozens of casualties, the majority of whom were women and children. In a statement issued a short while ago, Catherine Russell, the executive director of UNICEF, said she was appalled by these reported killings of 15 Palestinians, including 9 children and 4 women, who were just waiting in line for nutritional supplies for their children. And I can tell you that we yet again condemn the killings of civilians in Gaza. OCHA stresses that parties are bound by international humanitarian law to prevent such excessive death and injury of civilians in the midst of a war. All parties must take all feasible precautions to avoid and minimize civilian harm. Indiscriminate attacks and are strictly prohibited. Another strike today reportedly hit the offices of a humanitarian partner in Gaza City. 3 staff were killed. Yesterday, our partners providing education services said that between October of 2023 and June of this year, 626 temporary learning spaces had been established in Gaza with 240,000 students enrolled. About half of those students are girls. However, the partners say that only 299 spaces are currently operational due to the ongoing displacement orders, funding shortfalls, and a host of other challenges. Our humanitarian partners also, including first responders, health workers, and aid workers, continue to deliver food and other assistance under intolerable conditions, and they themselves are facing hunger. A number of our own colleagues are also facing hunger. They also face water scarcity and threats to their personal safety, just like everyone else in Gaza. As we've said time and time again, this catastrophic situation must end. A ceasefire is not only urgent, it is overdue, and all of the hostages need to be released unconditionally and immediately. Turning to the West Bank, our humanitarian colleagues there report and continue to warn of the intensification of operations by Israeli forces in northern areas. These operations are causing massive destruction, driving further humanitarian needs and dampening hopes of thousands of displaced families that they will be able to eventually go back home. Meanwhile, attacks and harassment and intimidation by Israeli settlers against Palestinians have become a daily reality, including a settler attack on July 3rd that led to the displacement of the Mujarrachat East Bedouin community in the central West Bank. This is the 9th community to be fully displaced in Ramallah and Jericho area since January 23, following the recurrent attacks by Israeli settlers. Turning to Lebanon, this morning in southern Lebanon, our UNIFIL peacekeepers faced aggressive behavior by a group of individuals. During a patrol in Sector West, several individuals blocked the peacekeepers and began throwing stones at them. Our peacekeepers were forced to use non-lethal smoke grenades to disperse the crowd. The Lebanese armed forces then arrived on the scene and the situation was brought under control. As a reminder, any attack against peacekeepers is a serious violation of Security Council Resolution 1701, and we call on the Lebanese authorities to bring the perpetrators to account. Yesterday, UN peacekeepers also discovered 2 unauthorized weapons caches in Sector West, including 3 tunnels containing non-operational military cannon, as well as operational rockets and explosives. The day before, UNIFIL also found unauthorized ammunition boxes in Sector East. All of these caches were referred to the Lebanese armed forces for disposal. In southern Lebanon, also continuing there, our UNIFIL colleagues report military presence of Israeli defense forces, as well as air and ground activities, including in the area of Kafir Kila. Yesterday, peacekeepers observed 11 IDF activities in their area of operations. Our UN colleagues continue to impartially monitor and report on violations of Resolution 1701 and support the parties in fulfilling their responsibilities under the resolution as mandated by the Security Council. Moving to Ukraine. The humanitarian coordinator for Ukraine, the UN humanitarian and resident coordinator for Ukraine, Matthias Schmale, says the overnight strikes by the Russian armed forces in the capital Kyiv caused several civilian casualties. 4 districts were hit during the attacks, damaging residential buildings, a clinic, and a TV channel facility. An outpatient clinic was also destroyed. Meanwhile, authorities also report civilian casualties following missile and drone attacks across the country. In the Donetsk region, 9 people were killed and 10 were injured, with damage to nearly 70 homes in 20 towns and villages in the area. The regions of Kherson, of Kharkiv, and Zaporizhzhia were also impacted, with reports of additional casualties and damage to civilian infrastructures, including ambulance and health facilities. Overnight attacks also struck 4 more regions in Cherniv, in Suny, in Poltava, and in as part of the continued pattern of widespread strikes beyond frontline areas. Humanitarian teams provided psychological support, hot meals, and repair materials. And for its part, our UN Human Rights Monitoring Mission in Ukraine today said that June saw the highest monthly civilian casualties in 3 years in Ukraine, with 232 people killed and 1,433 injured. In its monthly update on the protection of civilians, the UN Human Rights Monitoring Mission in Ukraine notes that last month the Russian Federation launched 10 times more missiles and loitering munition attacks against Ukraine than in June of 2024. Virtually no region of Ukraine was spared, regardless of the distance from the front lines. Our UN human rights colleague in Ukraine also say the figures for June confirmed last year's worsening trend, with 6,754 civilians killed or injured in the first half of 2025. This is a sharp 54% rise from the corresponding period last year in 2024. Also today, the UN Children's Fund said that around 70% of children in Ukraine, that's 3.5 million children, now lack access to basic goods and services, including adequate food or shelter. According to UNICEF, a third of Ukraine's children live in homes without functioning water supply and sewage, and nearly half of them lack access to an area to play at home or outside. Turning to Sudan, where the situation is not getting better, and our humanitarian colleagues tell us that the country's cholera outbreak continues to worsen. Tom Fletcher, our emergency relief coordinator, today allocated $5 million to support the urgent response efforts. The new funding will allow us to scale up time-critical health, water, sanitation, and hygiene activities to help stem the further spread of cholera. However, more resources are needed without delay. Humanitarian partners require 50 million United States dollars to sustain cholera response operations through the end of 2025. Our humanitarian colleagues warn that the outbreak is being fueled by ongoing conflict, mass displacement, and the collapse of public health and water systems. Since July of last year, Sudanese health authorities have reported more than 84,000 suspected cases and over 2,100 deaths across 17 of Sudan's 18 states, with upwards of 33,000 cases recorded this year alone. However, our partners on the ground warn that underreporting may be masking the true scale of this cholera outbreak. More than 33.5 million people, including 5.7 million children under the age of 5, are at risk of cholera. Our humanitarian colleagues say that Khartoum, Al Jazeera, and Gedaref and White Nile states account for more than 70% of all reported cases. Khartoum alone has reported more than 23,400 suspected cases. The outbreak is now expanding to Darfur, with cross-border transmission reported into Chad and South Sudan. OCHA warns that the ongoing rainy season, which lasts through October, threatens to worsen the crisis by contaminating water sources and driving further infections. It's critical that donors and the international community step up and urgently scale up financial support to prevent further spread of this deadly disease and to save lives. Turning to Somalia, where humanitarian colleagues say that clashes in the towns of Mokokori and Hiran, in the Hiran regions in the center of the country, have intensified since last week, displacing thousands of civilians. 6 health facilities in the area have suspended operations due to security concerns, cutting off access to essential health care and emergency services for thousands of vulnerable people. Continued fighting has also compromised water sources and supply routes, significantly increasing the risk of malnutrition and disease outbreak among displaced population. Our humanitarian partners and local authorities are working to verify how many people have been displaced. Nope. Always silence your phones. 6 health facilities in the area have suspended operations due to security concerns, cutting off access to essential health care, as I've said, to thousands of people. Continued fighting has also compromised water sources and supply routes, significantly increasing the risk of malnutrition, disease outbreaks among displaced population. Our humanitarian partners and local authorities are working to verify how many people have been displaced to assess options on how to best deliver assistance. More than 58,000 people have been forced to flee because of the armed conflict between the government forces and non-state armed groups in Hiran and Middle Shabelle region since January. And a couple more notes, one from the Democratic Republic of the Congo, where peacekeepers have established 2 mobile operating bases in the villages of Ofe and Bakuvutu in Jugu territory, in Ituri in the east. These mobile bases will help peacekeepers to respond quickly to local threats posed by armed groups in the area. The deployment will remain operational until mid-July and are parts of Operation Utor Bumi, which was launched in March of 2025 to help strengthen local security and support broader mission objectives, including by providing protection for quick impact projects such as rehabilitation of local administrative offices in Ofe and support the outcome of recent dialogue between armed groups that we've been telling you about. In North Kivu, suspected members of the Allied Democratic Forces carried out attacks on the 7th and 8th of July in 2 locations west of Eringeti, resulting in the deaths of 6 civilians. The peacekeeping mission condemns these acts of violence and continues to deploy patrols in ADF hotspots to facilitate the freedom of movements of civilians and access to farming areas. And our support mission in Libya strongly urges all parties in Libya to refrain from using force, particularly in densely populated areas, and to avoid any action or political rhetoric that could trigger escalation or lead to renewed clashes. The mission continues its effort to help de-escalate the situation in and around the capital city of Tripoli and calls on all parties to engage in good faith towards this end. The UN mission urges the swift implementation of security arrangements developed by the Truce and Security and Military Arrangements Committee, which the mission continues to support. Forces recently deployed in Tripoli must withdraw from that city without delay. Lastly, a report released today by our friends at the UN Environment Programme finds the annual heat-related deaths among older persons have risen by an estimated 85% since 1990s. The report recommends proactive urban planning that prioritizes age-friendly, resilient cities with reduced pollution and improved accessibility. UNEP also recommends expanded green spaces to safeguard this vulnerable population who form an increasingly dominant part of the world population. Edie, and then Gabriel.
Thank you, Steph. On fuel for Gaza, you mentioned how much got in yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
Did the UN try again today to get in more fuel, and did anything happen?
No, there's no new fuel. We keep asking and we keep wanting for more fuel to get in, but no new mission is going on today. Gabriel, yep.
Thank you, Steph. Does the Secretary General support Francesca Albanese on a personal level?
Look, I think the Secretary General respects the work of all UN human rights rapporteurs. Their work is extremely important. It's an extremely important part of the human rights architecture. This is his point: is that targeted unilateral sanctions against UN officials, against UN experts, which Ms. Albanese is, are just unacceptable.
And has the Secretary General sent any communique or anything
I
to
don't know.
anyone
I
at the
don't.
U.S.?
We're in the process of answering a letter from Ambassador Shea. Javier.
On the same issue, Steph, did she plan to come to New York, Ms. Albanese, in the coming
I don't
weeks?
know. You'd have to ask our human rights
And
colleagues.
if she comes, will she be able to enter the country and to access the United Nations to brief the Security
Well,
Council?
I mean, the access to the building is not an issue. Access to where the UN office is, in this particular case in New York, has to do with the United States. They grant the visas. The U.S., there is a host country agreement in which they are bound to facilitate the travel of UN officials, experts, and diplomats, just like headquarters agreements that we have in other places where we have headquarters. Benny, then Ibtisam.
So a couple of questions. First of all, Albanese. There have been some condemnations by other countries other than the U.S. of her work as anti-Semitic, including France, which you mentioned in the in the context of July 14. Does that enter into the calculation of the unacceptable line?
Look, the Secretary General is not in the business of commenting on the work of the special rapporteurs. They're independent. Those mandates are given to them by member states. Special rapporteurs, as I told Gabriel, have an important role to play in the human rights architecture. If if member states are unhappy with the work of special rapporteurs, and frankly, if you look at the series of special rapporteurs who have country-based or thematic-based mandates, there are a lot of member states who are not happy with one or different special rapporteurs at different times. That's their right. But our message is engage diplomatically with the UN human rights architecture and don't issue targeted sanctions.
On another topic, in your chronicling of West Bank issues,
Yeah.
I'm sorry if I missed that because I was like looking at something else, but did you mention today's murder of an Israeli in Gush Etzion?
It's not in my reporting, but I can tell you that we condemn the killings of all civilians, whether they be Israelis or Palestinians.
You did talk about violence by settlers, but this was violence by anti-settlers.
And
So
if I can refer you back to the various regular reports by senior officials to the Security Council, violence against civilians is routinely condemned, whether it's conducted by Israelis or Palestinians.
Oh, yeah, but you talked today, not in various reports. You talked today about
I'm just telling you,
violence, and you do as you do every day.
Right,
But
and-
you
and-
failed to mention this one.
Well, you know, I think that's the one thing you and Abdelhamid will agree on is I failed to mention everything that can please either one of you. Ibtisam.
Thank you. A follow-up on Albanese. The Human Rights Watch issued a statement on this issue, and I'm going to read one line in which they say UN and ICC member countries should strongly resist the U.S. government's shameless efforts to block justice for the world's worst crimes.
This is Human Rights Watch or UN Watch?
Human rights.
Human rights. Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
No, I've switched gears then. Okay, thank you.
No, Human Rights Watch. So in their statement, they also say that that government should strongly resist the war and condemn the outrageous sanction on Albanese. So I guess my question here, the following. These attacks on Albanese they are not isolated. There were attacks against UNRWA, attacks against Navy Pillay and her committee, any human rights, even UN human rights, are not able to get visas to Israel international staff, etc. So what is and if you remember also, Israel actually declared a few years ago 6 Palestinian human rights organizations and humanitarian organizations as terrorist organizations. And yet we have constantly the reaction from your office, yes, you don't agree with these steps that taken by US or Israel, but there is no clear public condemnations.
I mean,
and what are you doing? What is the Secretary General going to do to protect Albanese and Nabi Pillay and all these human rights workers for the UN?
With due respect, I think what I read out today was pretty clear. I'm not going to disagree with the points, the examples that you've raised, but let's take a step back and look at the attacks on the UN human rights architecture across the board. There are a lot of countries who face country mandates who don't allow their special rapporteurs to get in. We had the case of Venezuela not too long ago that expelled our human rights colleagues. And I think this folds into what the Secretary General referred to 10 days ago when he spoke about the Charter, and saying that it was really unacceptable for member states to have an a la carte approach to the Charter, to have an a la carte approach to the UN's human rights architecture, which was not drawn up by Antonio Guterres. It was drawn up by member states themselves. All of these member states have put their signature to this system. Engage with it. Work with it. That is our message. Yes, sir.
Hi, Steph. So reports have come out that the intergovernmental organization BRICS is increasingly trying to challenge the US dollar and the US-led economic order, to which President Donald Trump publicly responded by threatening to impose tariffs on any state that allies with or complies with this bloc. My question to you is, has the Secretary General been in contact with any lead officials of BRICS since their recent summit? And does he view their attempted expansion as beneficial or harmful to international peace? Thank you.
Secretary General was at the BRICS summit, as you well know. It's not the role of the Secretary General to get involved in payment systems and all those things. But I think his message has been very clear. We do not want to see more divisions in the global economic system, in the global trade system. Again, as for human rights, there is a global trade architecture that was created by member states. Use that, work with it, and ensure that it is fair to all. Abdelhamid.
Thank you. Albanese put a report to the Human Rights Council. It's called From the Economy of Occupation to the Economy of Genocide. Mm-hmm. In fact, it mentioned a number of companies like IBM, Microsoft and others who are helping Israel with committing this war of genocide. Does the SG feel that what these information are valid and it should be highlighted and he should express his concern about these companies?
Look, it is, it doesn't need the SG to be highlighted. I think it's getting quite a lot of coverage as it is. Again, the Secretary General is not going to be drawn into commenting on the work of these independent rapporteurs. I think his message to the private sector, as it always has been, is that the private sector has a critical role to play in ensuring that human rights are respected in their day-to-day work.
Thank you. My second question, 82 Palestinians were killed in the last 24 hours. And by the way, the man who was killed in Atzion is a soldier and is not a civilian. I'm sorry to say that, but I have to say. Okay, but 82 Palestinians, including those who were lining for food near the GHF. So now the number had reached over 57,700 Palestinians killed and 137,000 wounded. You normally remind us of the numbers. Why? I mean,
Abdelhamid, with all due respect, I talked about what happened today. I talked about the children that were killed waiting to get nutritional supplement. We condemn their killing. I convey to you the information that I have. Alex.
Thanks, Steph. Firstly, on Iran, is there any progress between Iran and IAEA on the Iran nuclear issue?
Please call Vienna.
All right. Secondly, quick follow-up on Ms. Albanese. So just to make it clear,
Sorry, go ahead.
On Ms. Albanese, as
Yeah.
for now, we don't know what the consequences of these sanctions will be, right? Is it correct?
Well, my understanding from what I've seen publicly reported is that she will not be allowed, unlikely to receive a visa to come to the United States.
Can I have one more?
Oh, please.
Yep. Russia's Lavrov met with Secretary Rubio today. Have any comments on that?
As you know, my standard comment, we always welcome dialogue.
Thank you.
Excellent. Evelyn, did you have a question?
Yes.
Yes, please, go ahead.
I have a couple of questions. First of all, Ms. Albanese, I have read every single word she's written. I find her full of errors, anti-Semitic.
But
and
what is your
I'm
question?
sorry,
What is your question?
Yeah, so my question is, I don't see how anyone who's such a bad researcher and has no nuances can be admired. And secondly, on Russia, does Russia give the United Nations any explanation of how killing innocent civilians will help their conquest of Ukraine?
I think if you're looking for member states to explain their position, I would encourage you to read what they tell the Security Council. Yes, ma'am.
Sorry, I didn't understand your answer.
What I'm saying, it's not, I mean, I think the Russia, like other countries, explains its position when on debate on Ukraine in the Security Council. So I would encourage you to read what they say. Yes, ma'am.
I think following the Albanese report, the UN did receive a lot of response being called, like including the Google co-founder Sergey Brin called the United Nations transparently anti-Semitic in response to the report. Does UN have any response to
I can
those
tell you,
comments?
I speak for the Secretary General, and I think his record on speaking out against anti-Semitism is unimpeachable. And from the time he's been Secretary General to his previous roles, including as Prime Minister of Portugal. It's okay. Don't be sorry, because I know you're not. But go ahead.
It's not, I mean, there is a lot of conflating of criticizing the government of Israel and anti-Semitism, especially from those who criticize, especially who are not happy with different organizations, including actually Israeli organizations, who are highlighting the human rights violations in Israel, and etc. So, does the Secretary General believe that criticizing the government of Israel is anti-Semitic? And when are you?
I think people need to have the intellectual bandwidth to separate anti-Semitisms from legitimate criticism of the actions of the government of Israel. Linda.
Thank you, Steph. Apropos of Albanese, is there any information we can get in terms of, you alluded to, many countries don't cooperate, or a number of countries don't cooperate with UN rapporteurs. They don't let them into the countries, et cetera. Is there any way, maybe a press conference or some kind of a briefing rather, to get a sense of really the level of cooperation by nation states around the world towards these rapporteurs?
I mean, listen, we can ask our human rights colleagues, and I think your colleagues in Geneva can ask the question, but I think you could pretty quickly look at all the country mandates that special rapporteurs have given to them by the Human Rights Council and see how many of those special rapporteurs have been allowed to visit the countries they're reporting on. And I think that number would be pretty low. Abdelhamid and then Benny.
Thank you. I hope you will be patient with me. Two questions. One, the settlers today conducted a wedding inside Ibrahimi Mosque in Hebron. Is that is that a civilized
I'm not aware
behavior?
of that specific case, but I think we've spoken extensively about the issues of settlers.
My second question, is the SG worried about the world we live in when a superpower tries to impose its vision on other countries? Like President Trump asking Brazil to drop the charges against Bolsonaro. He asked Israel also not to try Netanyahu. He imposes sanctions on UN officials and ICC, Albanese, and many others. What kind of a world that the SG can
Well, I mean, I think, listen, if you look at the SG's recent comments, as I alluded to Ibtisam, his view on where the Charter is and the respect for the Charter is, I think you can draw your own conclusions. And I think if you look at most of his General Assembly speeches and how they start, they don't really start by painting a rosy picture. Speaking of rosy pictures, Benny.
Very rosy today. Steph, so I know that you make this distinction every time we talk about this issue, saying these are independent rapporteurs and have nothing to do with the Secretary General. But, you know, I mean, people outside this room and everywhere else say the UN says, and then quote Albanese.
Yeah.
So is is the Secretary General concerned that the image that Albanese, I mean, you refuse to talk about the content, none of your business, but is he concerned that that reflects on the UN in the eyes of most people in the world who are not in this room?
We trust you and all the other journalists to explain what the UN is and what the UN is not. And let's face it, you know, we have on one hand the world's most recognizable logo, but by design, no brand management. So many people can speak with the UN logo behind them or in front of them. The SG has the authority, or the non-authority that he has is given to him by the Charter. And we hope that people take the time to truly understand that when they're not happy about the UN, they actually target the criticism of which part of the UN they're not happy about. Are they not happy about the special rapporteurs? Are they not happy about the legislative bodies of this organization? Are they not happy about the Secretary General? Let's be precise.
But he also has a very able spokesman, as far as I know, who isn't it also part of the, for the better word, public relation of the UN, not only to explain that she is not part of the Secretariat, but also to opine on what she actually says. Because everybody says the UN says.
I trust that I try to do my job to the best of my limited ability, and I hope you all do yours in helping the global public understand the UN better. Ephraim, and then we have to go to our guest who's been extremely patient.
I have a very quick one also on Ms. Albanese. Is it safe to assume that the Secretary General, if he had heard her say anything anti-Semitic, he would call her out on it and condemn her?
The Secretary General is not in the business of grading or commenting on what special rapporteurs
But if it's anti-Semitism, he would not just let it pass, right? Because
he has been very outspoken on the issue of anti-Semitism.